Brock Purdy is a much better dynasty quarterback than he is an NFL quarterback.
And I disagree.
We'll debate that and more on this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Magdziuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Magdziuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Magdziuk. On today's show, we're going to be discussing Brandon Aiyuk's lackluster day against the Seahawks. We'll talk about Jaxon, Smith-Njigba, and of course, it's commotion at the end of the show. But Kate, I want to start with Brock Purdy, who had a very good fantasy day, 18 of 28 for 255 yards and 3 touchdowns, also added in 19 yards on the ground. I think you were very happy with what he did on Thursday in your fantasy leagues. And I'm starting to become more and more intrigued with the idea that he's a top 10, maybe top 12 dynasty quarterback moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, this team has been totally riddled with injuries. And still, we've seen Brock Purdy put up some pretty competent quarterback plays without Christian McCaffrey. They've just kind of been out of sync, you could say. Their red zone offense has been totally inefficient this year. It feels like things got right. This was a real get right game for the San Francisco 49ers. They were on the road. We know that the Seahawks Stadium, not a pleasant place to be, but Purdy had an absolute baller game. And I'm watching Brock Purdy, and every single week I am more convinced that he is the real deal. Now, that has big implications for his overall fantasy value, right? He had a really solid day with those 3 touchdowns. He's an efficient passer. And I'm still kind of looking at the dynasty ranks. Last batch of ADP we got, QB 15 in dynasty startup drafts. That's low. And I think there's a non-zero chance that Brock Purdy could be the highest paid quarterback in the league come the end of this season when he gets a monster extension. Now, why aren't we valuing him as highly in Dynasty? Because now you're all aboard on Dynasty. You're not sold on his NFL value. So, tell us about the discrepancy there, because I completely disagree.
Well, one of the reasons why this team is so good and they have so many great weapons is because Brock Purdy is being paid less than $1 million a year. So you can afford to keep a Brandon Aiyuk on top of a Deebo Samuel and a Jaywan Jennings, who they signed this offseason, and keep George Kittle and make Trent Williams the highest paid left tackle in the league. I have some concerns once Purdy gets that deal, and I think you're right. I think he's going to be the highest paid quarterback in the league. You're just not going to see that collection of talent. I was talking with NFL historian Elliot Harrison the last couple of days, and we were going over the best skill players ever on the same team. And there's never been a team in NFL history that has at least 3 Pro Bowlers in their prime on the same roster. And this offense has Brandon Aiyuk, who's a Pro Bowler, Deebo Samuel, who's an All-Pro, George Kittle, who's an All-Pro. Obviously, Christian McCaffrey is not in this conversation right now. Kyle Juszczyk, who's a Pro Bowler. I mean, you're talking about one of the best supporting casts of all time. And I just think over the next few years, it's not going to look that way because of the salary cap restraints that they have. Now, maybe Ricky Pearsall, who they drafted in the first round, can help replace whoever they lose. But I have some concerns that once they start to lose some talent, you're not going to see the same level of production moving forward.
So then why are you sold on his dynasty value? I think that's because I'm watching this and I think, yes, is he playing in a super favorable system with some excellent playmakers around him? Absolutely. I'm not going to say that he's not, because that would be stupid, but he's still executing the system far better than we ever saw Jimmy Garoppolo do. Obviously not the same cast of weapons, but still Kyle Shanahan can make a mountain out of a molehill when it comes to talent because of his ability to scheme things open. Like it,
He can. Yes.
it's a great offense, but Brock Purdy executes it at a much higher level. And I think you see the poise, you see everything. Like I'm a firm believer in Brock Purdy here.
So
Just big.
I want to answer your question because I think it's a fair question. Why aren't we factoring that more into the dynasty price? I think we are, because I think if you told me over the next 5 years that he was going to continue to have this receiving core around him, I think you would have him inside the top 6 or top 7. I think he would be where Joe Burrow is currently in dynasty rankings, but I think we all know that eventually things are going to get tight with the 49ers, just like they're going to get tight with the Bengals, right? Like we all know that T. Higgins is likely leaving after this year. And if it's just Jamar Chase and Jermaine Burton and Andre Yoshivas, it's just not as intriguing to have Joe Burrow on your team as it was over the last couple of years. So I do think it's baked into the price a little bit. Having said that, Kate, I still think he is a massive buy at QB 15. And I think he is much, much closer to like QB 8 than QB 15.
Yeah, I firmly agree with you there. And I mean the comparison with Joe Burrow currently being drafted quarterback 7 in the same batch of Dynasty ADP, it's an interesting comparison, right? Because neither of these guys are, tremendous athletes that are going to have the crux of their game rely on the run like an Anthony Richardson. Like that is not where you're going to score the bulk of your fantasy points from Joe Burrow or Brock Purdy. It's going to be through the air. It's going to be through passing touchdown production. But the gap between Joe Burrow at QB 7 and Brock Purdy at QB 15 feels way too significant because just from the circumstances you mentioned, right? Like consider both of these guys in pretty similar situations. They each have their respective wide receiver ones. And then, if you want to project that the 49ers are going to be in some cap trouble, they're going to not have a great cast of weapons around them in this offense. Neither is Joe Burrow. But if I'm looking at the play calling situation, I want the guy, with Kyle Shanahan calling the plays. Like I think you can actually make a reasonable argument for Brock Purdy over Joe Burrow. They're in a pretty similar situation overall, and Brock Purdy has Kyle Shanahan on his side. So like I just can't understand the gap there. Even if you don't believe in that long-term value, if you feel comfortable ranking Joe Burrow as a top 10 dynasty quarterback, I think you have to say the exact same thing about Brock Purdy.
Yeah, and again, the 49ers cap situation gets really rough next year. Brock Purdy will be eligible for a contract extension. This is when some of the big numbers start to kick in with Brandon Aiyuk. Christian McCaffrey's new deal starts to kick in. It's going to get rough. So we know Aiyuk is going to be there because he signed a long-term deal. Everybody outside of Aiyuk, I think, is potentially on the chopping block. I wanted to mention Aiyuk, though, Kate, because we're through 6 games now. The 49ers are 3-3. Brandon Aiyuk, 23 catches for 351 yards, 0 touchdowns. Are you concerned about Brandon Aiyuk? Only one game over 50 yards this season.
I don't know that I am from a long-term perspective. You mentioned obviously the number of weapons. We know that Brandon Aiyuk missed time this entire offseason, and he just hasn't looked totally in sync with the rest of the offense. And we know that this is an offense that like some games are going to be funneled through George Kittle. You're going to have a big George Kittle game. You're going to have a big Deebo Samuel game. You're going to have a big Brandon Aiyuk game. But like we kind of know that rotation, right? From a dynasty perspective, however, if we know that it's going to be Brock and it's going to be Aiyuk, like you have to assume that that rotation of production from a fantasy standpoint is probably going to be more limited. And, moving forward, a higher concentration of targets. We saw the level of efficiency that Brandon Aiyuk had. I think in part it was due to, the fact that the overall offense was just healthier. But he's got a great quarterback tied to him for the foreseeable future. And yeah, I'm not all that concerned because I believe in the talent. I think that he's off to a relatively slow start because he needs to get in a rhythm.
I'm not concerned long term. I am a little bit concerned like this year, like redraft league, because you have Debo Samuel healthy. Jawan Jennings is playing really well. Christian McCaffrey, we do expect to come back at some point. So I do worry about him a little bit this year, but long term, we know he's going to be the guy that's there. And in that 49ers offense, it's always going to be efficient, not worried about Brandon Aiyuk. I will tell you one receiver, Kate, that I am a little worried about, and that is Jaxon Smith-Njigba of the Seattle Seahawks. Let's discuss him next. This episode is brought to you by Robinhood. With Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for the high society. Now, the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.5 APY on uninvested cash, receive unlimited 1% deposit bonuses, and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on an IRA account. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For product-specific disclosures, visit robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rate may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold, LLC. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in award winnings, PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on PrizePicks. I love PrizePicks for so many different reasons, but one of the reasons I really enjoy it is that it's available in so many different states, including California, Florida, Georgia, and Texas. PrizePicks is also the only real money daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy, so your lineups stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. If your player leaves in the first half and doesn't return, PrizePicks keeps your lineup alive. So sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Go to prizepicks.com or download the app today and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app today. Use promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We are recapping Thursday Night Football, Seahawks, 49ers. Kate, let's talk about the Seattle side of things because, and this is another kind of rough game for Jaxon Smith-Njigba. Again, in PPR leagues, you get 10 points, 5 for 53. But on the season, 34 catches, 310 yards, only 1 touchdown. He's averaging 9.1 yards per catch, which is incredibly low. I thought that would be way higher this year. Are you concerned about JSN?
I am a little concerned. And I think just still from a talent perspective, I think that talent is there. But you look at the usage, right? He has one of the lowest ADOTs among qualifying wide receivers, 7.7 yard average depth of target. That ranks in the 20th percentile for wide receivers, 40th percentile in yards per route run, 43rd percentile in separation percentage. Like, he's actually not doing as much as we had hoped with the opportunity that he has. Just slightly above average in terms of yards after the catch. Like, everything just feels kind of ordinary. But I also am looking at the Seattle Seahawks as a whole, and I'm saying they kind of feel kind of ordinary, don't they?
I was really hoping this offense was going to be good, Kate, and it is. It's not a bad offense, but the problem is they get behind in some of these games, and then it turns into a shootout, right? And they kind of have to be. Geno Smith had 52 passing attempts this game. Last game against Detroit, 56 passing attempts. So when you're throwing the ball, however many times it is, 108 times, and Jaxon Smith-Njigba still can't get in the end zone, still has a low target volume, I am concerned. I was hoping that this offense, Kate, would be more JSN dependent, and he would be the one that's moving the chains, and it would be Metcalf as the one that they're taking shots down the field with. But there's still way too many times where Metcalf is the one getting double-digit targets. Like in this game, 11 targets, and he has 3 receptions. Even Tyler Lockett had 8 targets in this game, and a lot of them were like high leverage targets. It just feels like JSN is still the third receiver in this offense.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm still just kind of surprised about that. You look at, what Tyler Lockett has done in general over the past couple of years. Like Jaxon Smith-Njigba should be theoretically more involved. And interestingly, like it doesn't feel like he's involved. He's actually tied to lead the team with Tyler Lockett in terms of end zone targets, second most red zone targets on the year, only behind DK Metcalf. But he hasn't been able to capitalize on those opportunities. Ranks well behind Metcalf and Lockett in terms of yards per reception, almost 2 fewer yards per target than either of those wide receivers. Now, again, some of that can be attributed to the low average depth of target, like DK Metcalf being targeted on average 13 yards down the field. Tyler Lockett being targeted on average just under 11 yards down the field. When you look at Jaxon Smith-Njigba and you see that he's being targeted 8 yards down the field, you see the little discrepancy there. And that does provide kind of this like lower ceiling overall. Now, he does have more receiving yards than Tyler Lockett, despite being super inefficient with those options. Thank God he has 48 targets on the year. But like it's getting kind of frustrating when you try to figure out how to navigate this backfield, because like he's getting some of these like lower value touches because they're closer to the line of scrimmage, because there's fewer opportunities for deep plays. He's currently ranked 3rd among those wide receivers in fantasy points per touch. Like he's not making the most of the opportunities he has seen so far.
Can we talk about Kenneth Walker a little bit? Because Kenneth Walker on the ground in this game, Kate, 14 for 32, 2.3 yards per carry, did get in the end zone. But here's why I wanted to bring him up. I mean, on the ground, what's that? 9 fantasy points just from rushing production, but 8 catches for 37 yards on 8 targets. He's actually been way more involved as a receiver over the last couple of weeks. Do you want to guess how many catches he has in the last 2 games combined?
I think it's somewhere around 14.
15. Yeah. 15 receptions over the last 2 games, 21 catches in 4 games this season. I think with him becoming more involved as a receiver, and let's just be clear, he's not Christian McCaffrey. He's not one of those type of running backs, but he is being more or used as like an outlet receiver. I'm really starting to think about bringing him way up my dynasty rankings because he's getting the short yardage work. He's getting more passing down work. And outside of this game, he's looked pretty darn efficient running the ball too.
Yeah, I mean, he's just kind of checking all the boxes. In the last 3 weeks, Kenneth Walker, 31 rush attempts to Charbonnet's 9. And it's not that Charbonnet hasn't looked good either. I think Charbonnet has looked good on the opportunities that he's seen. But Kenneth Walker, 100% of the team's red zone carries at the running back position, 100% of those carries inside the 5. He's been efficient with those opportunities, 3 touchdowns on 4 attempts inside the 5-yard line. So like the usage that you're seeing in Ryan Grubb's offense tells you that there's like a pretty significant gap here between Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet. And the fact that he is finally starting to be utilized, 21 total targets over the past 3 weeks combined, 19 receptions, 130 receiving yards. Like, that's crazy usage. And like for a guy who I think we most often had kind of pegged as this, more of a half PPR, standard scoring, non-PPR guy, he's suddenly looking like a PPR star.
Yeah, I mean, he's only played 4 games this year, but in PPR leagues, he scored at least 14.5 points in every single game this season. I mean, how many other running backs have that kind of week-to-week consistency, Kate? And we haven't even seen a big – well, that's not true. He had, in week 1, 20 carries for 103 yards. I was going to say we haven't seen a huge rushing day from him yet, but I think they're coming. Like, I think these games of like 17 carries for 105 yards and 2 touchdowns are coming. They play some easier opponents coming up. Like more when we get to fantasy playoffs and stuff. But I'm buying Kenneth Walker.
I mean, yeah, I think that's very fair. The question is, how high do you go with that valuation? Because I've been telling you, I think that the RB dead zone is pretty much anywhere inside the top 15. Kenneth Walker might be one of the best options
Well, let's go
available
through it.
here. Let's go through it. Because I'm looking at Breece Hall RB2, Bijan Robinson RB1, Christian McCaffrey RB3. I have to imagine that ADP is going to shake up. I wouldn't be surprised if Jahmyr Gibbs is closer to RB1 in the next batch of Dynasty ADP. But I think that Kenneth Walker probably deserves.
I'd take Kenneth Walker over Breece Hall.
Yeah, somewhere in the top 5. Like,
so like the only thing for me is like Jonathan Taylor. I would lean Walker because Taylor's really starting to get banged up over the last couple of years and doesn't offer a lot as a receiver. I would take Walker over A-Chain. I would take Walker over ETN. I would take Walker over Barkley. So yeah, I think we're talking about pretty easily a top 5 dynasty running back. And I would take, at this point, I would take Kenneth Walker over Christian McCaffrey as well.
Whew! We just, I mean, we did it.
One of these guys plays, Kate, and the other one does not.
Yep. That's fair.
I know Kenneth Walker went from somebody who was being drafted outside the top 10 to you can make a case that he's a top 3 dynasty running back right now behind Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs.
Only 23 years old as well.
Yeah.
Like you look
a better
at
offense.
On a better offense, on an offense that's, making it a point to get him the ball at a high rate. Like when he's on the field, whether it's a rush attempt, wasn't the case last week. They continued to go back to him over and over and over again in the run game this week, despite those inefficiencies. Like he's definitely their guy. And that was my biggest reservation about Walker heading into this year. But like, if you can, kind of maneuver some of the perceived value there, I think Kenneth Walker, probably a top 3 running back rest of season. Yes. He's young. He's on a good offense. Like all steam ahead for Kenneth Walker.
All right, let's do some commotion players that we are promoting from our bench or maybe even the waiver wire into our starting lineups in week 6. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You can get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That is FanDuel.com. Go check out all of the lines for week 6. Kate's Steelers are 3-point favorites in Las Vegas over the Raiders. I love that with Aiden O'Connell starting for the Raiders this week. I think the Steelers get back on track. Go make that $5 bet. You'll get $200 in bonus bets that you can use on literally anything from the money line, the point spreads, the totals. I love the futures market. I love betting on who's going to make the playoffs, who's not going to make the playoffs, who's going to win the Offensive Rookie of the Year award. So many great options over on FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. Again, that is FanDuel.com. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, make sure you go check out the new Locked On NFL show. 2 shows every single day, one in the morning with Tyler Rowland, one in the afternoon with Tony Wiggins. They do fantastic jobs over there. So go download the podcast wherever you get your podcast. It's free and available on all platforms. Kate, let's do some commotion. Who are you promoting from your bench or your waiver wire into your starting lineups this week?
Okay, I'm going to go back to your guy, Marcus. I'm going with Jalen Tolbert, who I think is a really interesting option here this week up against this Lions defense. Rico Dowdle kind of got it going last week, had a career high mark in terms of touches in a single game. But I still think going up against this Lions rushing defense, the way they're going to attack this team is through the air. I think they're going to go back to CeeDee Lamb, back to Jake Ferguson, and back to Jalen Tolbert, who had a really good showing here in his debut in Brandon Cooks' absence here in that wide receiver 2 role. I love Jalen Tolbert this week, and I don't feel like I'm point chasing.
No, I don't think you are either. He played most of the offensive snaps last week. I believe he ran almost every route. There might have only been 2 snaps where he wasn't on the field. It's clear that Dak Prescott trusts him. He was at Dak's house most of the offseason getting ready for this year. They want to use him. And I think this is going to be a shootout. I don't see how Dallas stops Detroit at all in this game. So I think if Dallas wants to win, it's going to be like one of those 38-35 games. So this is another good week to plug in Jalen Tolbert. Kate, I want to go to New England. I think this is a week that you want to start Jalen Polk. I think they're going to throw the ball a lot this week against Houston because they're going to have no choice to. But I think it's going to be a lot of short underneath routes. And actually, I think that's when Polk's been used a lot. We've seen Polk get quite a few targets over the last couple of weeks. I think this is a week where he could get 11 targets. And again, probably not going to be big numbers, but could he give you 8 for 80? I think so.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. Let's keep it rolling here on the East Coast. Maybe head over to one of my favorite matchups and one of the games I'm most excited to see all of this week. Washington Commanders versus the Baltimore Ravens. This is going to be such a fun game. And the Baltimore Ravens have been more beatable through the air. You look at both sides of the ball, honestly, I think this could just be a bona fide shootout. The Baltimore Ravens going up against this Commanders offense that's just leaking points to opposing fantasy wide receivers here. I think you start just about anybody in this game with a pulse, but maybe Rashad Bateman.
That was my name. That was the guy that I had in this one. Yes.
I know it feels pretty gross, but he's got just over 60 fewer receiving yards than Zay Flowers on the year. Actually has one more touchdown, has a higher receiving success rate per Pro Football Reference. He hasn't been utilized a lot, but he's been pretty solid when he's in the game, averaging 15.5 yards per touch in comparison to Zay Flowers, 10.5. I kind of like Bateman as a potential flex play here up against the Commanders. And on the Commanders side of the ball, I think this is going to be an opportunity for both of them just to absolutely air this football out. So I don't know, take your pick of anybody. I'm starting probably Zach Ertz in leagues. Can you start,
Luke McCaffrey?
I don't know.
I think Bateman's the best call because he's going to be on the field a bunch. And I actually think he's looked pretty good over the last couple of weeks. Now, the Buffalo game, they got up so early in that game that they didn't really have to throw a bunch. And the same thing in the Cowboy game. I think Lamar Jackson only had 14 attempts. I think this is going to be a game where they're going to have to throw the crap out of the ball. And you want your starting receiver paired with Lamar Jackson. And it feels like Bateman has finally got over some of these injury bumps that have kind of plagued him over the first couple of years of his career. I think this is a good spot for him.
Yeah, super excited to see how this plays out. Anybody else on your end? Because I feel like we haven't hit the gross. We haven't hit the pinnacle of grossness.
No, we're gonna save some of our gross picks for next week. I know we have some buys this week, but luckily with the Chiefs on bye, we're not losing any receivers that are useful for fantasy, right? So it's actually not that bad. Jalen Polk, Rashad Bateman, both really good options if you just need a what the heck flex. I think it's fantastic. That is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty Football your first listen every single day. Go check out our channel on YouTube. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Majuk. I'm at Marcus_Mosher. Enjoy week 6, and we'll see you right back here on Monday.